This concept of either you're winning or you're learning. You build a sense of transparency and trust, and they understand why you're doing what you're doing. And you put people in good position. You hire for intellect and drive, give people transparency and trust. And I think the culture piece of it sort of takes care of itself.
Everyone wants to build stronger pipeline, but only a few know how to make it happen. If you're listening to this show, you know Outbound is not dead. You just need a little help building a system that actually works. Well, you're in the right place. I'm Todd Busler, and on this show, we're breaking down the plays, processes, and frameworks behind repeatable pipeline growth, straight from the people who built it. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, Todd Busler here. Welcome to today's episode. I'm really excited for our guest. His name is Scott Peyser. He's the SVP of Operations at CBTS, and he had a long journey throughout revenue operations and sales management at companies like EMC and UiPath and Clari. And during today's episode, what he does a great job of is explaining what are the constants throughout different stages of a company life cycle, and how are the ways he goes to lead sales teams, his learnings, things he would do differently, and how he approaches building high performance sales cultures. Enjoy. All right, Scott, I'm really excited to chat with you. We know each other from when you were at Clari, but I want to even start before that. You know, you were at UiPath right around the IPO and saw some really good growth over that time. I want to start there. What did you take away from that experience, really around scaling teams and pipeline and rigor?
We were making a pretty good shift there because when I joined, the company was already about $800 million. It had gone through this hypergrowth stage. And what fueled UiPath's growth was, it was sort of a workload by workload or use case by use case on automation. And so they had something like 10,000 customers when I joined. Net new logo wasn't the problem. Expansion was the challenge. And it was this shift of getting account executives to think about doing a little bit more work, like focus on the right research, focus on the right POV, figure out the expansion opportunities in existing accounts, as opposed to this churn and burn mentality of just new logo after new logo. And that's what I took away, is finding that kind of right balance, because I've historically worked in companies where you had to find that balance, and I learned what it was like to drive in this hyper growth model. And there are great parts of that to take away, but it's not an either or proposition. You really do have to find the right balance between the two.
I just got off of the much earlier stage company founder trying to find that balance right now. How do you structure that? How much time in each area? What's the comp plan? It's not easy. So Scott, tell me about you. You went to a much smaller company at Clari. I think what's really interesting about talking to revenue leaders from Clari is, you spend all day talking to different CROs and RevOps and boards, thinking about forecasting and pipeline visibility. How did being inside that organization that thinks so deeply and critically about the revenue motion shape your view of outbound, of pipeline generation, of predictability?
Yeah, I think what I saw at Clari had actually crystallized earlier in my career. So the reason I went to Clari is because one of the things that I focus on is running really tight process. And that's what you learn when you work at an EMC or a Dell for as long as I did. You figure out how to build that kind of process. And at Dell, I built that process for a global services sales team. And I essentially had a full-time person on my staff running spreadsheets, building all of that insight. And so being able to take what I thought was a best-in-class process that I had learned over years and work with a best-in-class product and put those two together is what motivated me to get there. I think at Clari, Todd, I saw like this incredible gamut of approaches, right? The wavering between new logo sales teams and full stack sellers, what they wanted to inspect, how they wanted to inspect. I just sort of boiled it down to three things on the outbound, which is one is like, you got to have focus. So no matter what your structure is, you have some sort of goals that are in place for outbound net new opportunity, whether that's new logo or expansion. Two is you have to create dedicated time for the effort. Too many people try to do it in their spare time, or you find 5 minutes or 10 minutes here, right? It's setting the blocks of time where all you're doing is outbound. You can get in that motion and you're mentally prepared for the no's and you can keep going. And then the third thing is continuous pipeline inspection, not as part of deal inspection, not as part of your weekly forecast process, but actually having dedicated time where you're just focused on what activities are you doing, what pipeline are you creating, and not just in quarter, but current quarter plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, plus 4, and building that 13-week motion in a quarter that takes all those things into account.
I love those three themes, especially the making dedicated time part. It's like going to the gym. Like, hey, you wait to the end of the day, the chance of it not happening is going up every single moment that passes. Was there any other like big takeaways you saw? Because one thing I love about my job at Champify is I talk to smart revenue leaders like yourself, where I'm always picking up nuggets. Was there anything specific in customers, individual customers you worked with, where you found yourself learning from them?
Yeah, there's small nuggets you get everywhere. What are some of the levers and motivators you use in compensation planning to drive a focus on net new? I mean, one of the things I picked up actually, and something I had never done before, is we not only assigned pipeline targets, but we actually had the sales teams forecast against their expected pipeline. So every week, the sales rep was forecasting their in-quarter close business and their in-quarter pipeline development activities. And we had those goals established. And so, yeah, you pick up little nuggets like that that just make you think differently. And that's something I've taken away from my time at Clari and, already starting to use at CBTS.
It's funny, serendipitous timing. I was on a webinar yesterday and someone called that like, yeah, we talk about our pipelines pipeline. And at first you're like, what are you talking about? But it makes sense, right? Like you have a commit or you have a call in pipeline and you need to think about the leading indicators to that as well. All right, Scott, let's dig into now CBTS. We just hopped right into it, just about, hey, here is what CBTS is for the people that aren't as familiar. And then I'd love to hear from your perspective is kind of what was the draw for you? What's the opportunity you saw and see now that you have a couple quarters in C?
So CBTS was a little bit of a callback to my past. I talked about my experience being on the OEM side, and CBTS is a services first business. So we're focused on a couple of different technology pillars. So application security, infrastructure, digital workplace, and cloud. And the idea that sort of the holy grail or the perfect model for these types of companies is you provide the platform through a resale motion. You support your client through these transformation initiatives with designing and deploying the environments. And ultimately, you have the opportunity to either co-manage or manage those environments on their behalf and drive really long-term successful outcomes. And so you got this great revenue stream, or revenue streams, I should say. And I think it was the opportunity to take the experience of being in the SaaS world and some of those lessons we talked about already and apply them into a more structured business model. And it was attractive, great leadership team, people that I felt like I could go learn with and from, and an opportunity to be in private equity too, which is something I hadn't done in the past.
What's been the biggest difference, Scott, for working at a pure play SaaS vendor like a UiPath or Clari and moving to something like a CBTS in terms of how you approach the customer? Or has there been things that jump out of like, hey, this is what feels the most different when it comes to the go-to-market motion?
Yeah, I think in the SaaS space, you have a very purpose-built offer, right? And so at UiPath, it was around robotic process automation, and at Clari, it's around revenue orchestration. And you have generally a pretty clear persona you're selling to and a pretty consistent story. And you have to do the important things like research and have a point of view and do discovery. Those are all things that stand the test of time. But at CBTS, you really have to be able to present a value proposition that's a little bit different, because everyone might sound the same. And so back to the concept of focus, what do we really want to be good at? Where do we drive value for customer, and not trying to be everything to everybody?
Focus has come up multiple times here. I want to dive back to that. When you mentioned the UiPath experience, like a lot of this podcast, a lot of the people I talk with, it is really often centered around this new logo motion, right? Which is getting more challenging for a lot of companies. At UiPath, it felt like you had to really mature the motion for that expansion motion, right? And improve the culture around how do we go do that? How did you approach that problem? What were some of the big learnings there? Because I do think there's a lot of companies that have now, hey, we've landed a bunch of logos. We haven't put enough effort on how do we go grow these accounts? And I'd love to hear some of your learnings.
Yeah, and obviously sellers never think they have enough territory to sell into, right? They all want more accounts. And we had something like, I don't remember the exact count, Todd, but I think it was 15,000 accounts that sat in an enterprise segment. which is just nuts when you think about that. And so the shift that we were trying to make is that focus was like, it's pretty standard, right? You build a patch, you sell into the patch, you shrink the patch, you sell more, you shrink the patch. Like you keep funneling that patch down. And we had a challenge doing that. And so what I did to try to drive the behavior was created this concept of untapped potential. Have you ever met a sales rep that believes Sam or Tam? They don't. So created this concept of untapped potential. And, at UiPath, it was really clear. We had a couple of verticals: financial services, healthcare, life sciences, manufacturing, regulated industries. And we looked at, based on size of customer in terms of number of employees, because we sold by the seat, number of employees and revenue, we created bands of customers. And we looked at each of those bands by each industry and said, who's number one and number two? And the untapped potential became the difference between that one and two and the other customers. And so we were able to go talk to the sales leaders and say, new logo is not our problem. Untapped potential is our problem. We could go double the size of the business if we just went and got our fair share of the untapped potential. And when you walk sales leaders and sellers through that kind of data-driven process, they were quick to react. Now, we didn't get to exactly where I wanted to get to in terms of our reductions, but we got to a really, really good point, and we saw the trajectory of the expansion business immediately start to increase because, again, of that focus that we created for our sellers.
Was a lot of that around like, hey, here's new line of businesses we need to tap into? Like, where did most of it come from? Because I would imagine you had many reps take over these accounts. Oh, that's kind of tapped out. And it was your job to show them like, no, here it is, go get it. What else did you find there?
Yeah, so it's two dimensions. The first dimension would be use cases within lines of business, right? So if you think about finance and invoice processing, and there's a million different ways you can automate processes in that workflow. So one, going to understand what other processes we could, and then you shift because financials. So running an AR was really easy. Now let's go to HR. Let's go to manufacturing. Let's go to sales processes. And so it was showing them both the expansion of existing use cases and then other lines of business.
Yeah, that makes sense. I really like the kind of thinking about the potential part. I find myself a lot saying like, I don't even care what the land is. Like, let's think about what this could be and approach the account that way. Like, I don't care if someone's spending $10,000 with this. If it can be $500,000, let's treat it like that from day one and start thinking about it like that. So
yeah, and it was easy to do. I mean, think about it. If you have a customer like JP Morgan Chase that spends $5 million with you, even if that's not really the amount we think we can get, shouldn't Bank of America spend $5 million? And shouldn't Morgan spend $5 million, and shouldn't everybody else? And so it just was a way to help our teams click and really understand what we were trying to create.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. When I talk to you, I hear a lot about really systems thinking, like, all right, get to a focus, have a system, run tight rigor. A big part of that is building the right culture, being a strong leader. I've heard you describe yourself as someone who finds green space within large companies. Like, how do you approach that? Is that a mindset? How do you get that to cascade to the rest of your team? I'd love for you to dig into it a bit.
Yeah, I think it starts for me with the concept of guiding principles. I had a leader that I once worked with that just sort of hammered on, what are the guiding principles? What are we trying to accomplish? And I find that as operations teams and salespeople, we tend to want a solution super quick. And we're not entirely sure of what problem we're solving for. I think being grounded in the guiding principles of what we're trying to accomplish is really, really important. And ultimately, success in culture, I think, comes down to one or two things, right? Again, it's focus and talent, and making sure that you have the guiding principles, you're top grading your teams, you're thinking about sort of the change management process that you have to put into place. And, I think just if people have a set of goals and they understand the guiding principles, the culture just sort of takes care of itself. And there's this little bit of philosophy I didn't know, but Nelson Mandela apparently said this the first time. I never knew this, but this concept of either you're winning or you're learning. And I love that because I share that with my teams, and you build a sense of transparency and trust, and they understand why you're doing what you're doing. And you put people in good position. You hire for intellect and drive. Give people transparency and trust. And I think the culture piece of it sort of takes care of itself.
Any other examples of kind of guiding principles? Because I agree with you. I think sales leaders in general tend to move to the solution part real fast and like a step back around, hold on, what do we stand for? What are we trying to do? Anything else that jumps out there as examples you used in the past?
No, I really like that has been my rock. That has been my rock. I joke with people. A lot of people have this structured process they follow, right? This is my structured process. What are we solving for? Why are we solving for it? And what does good look like at the end? And that sort of takes care of everything else.
Scott, your experience is so interesting to me because it's like been both like the Dell days or now CBTS, the like really high flying SaaS companies at different scales. I'm sure during parts of that, you've been in these super high growth winning environments, but also parts of that where it's like, hey, the business unit or the team I'm responsible is not performing up to what you want it to be. How do you approach culture in difficult moments? Because I tend to think like, look, when you're winning, it solves most of the problems, but sometimes you're not in that part. So like, how do you approach it for leaders listening or maybe newer leaders that are like, hey, I'm not in that moment right now. How do I keep morale high? How do I approach this?
Listen, I think it might be trite to say this, but you got to find balance. Another one of my favorite quotes that stuck with me, this guy, John Albanese, who I worked for a really long time. We had just come off of our best year ever, like one of my best personal years ever. And we're sitting in his office and he said to me, Scott, we're not as good as they think we are right now. And we won't be as bad as they think we are at the end of this year. And for me, that kind of crystallized, like you have to just show sort of this equanimity about how you run the business. And I wasn't great at that early in my career, but it's something that I've really spent a lot of time on focused on. And I think it has helped people to understand that one, we're going to make mistakes. Two, we're not going to execute perfectly. Three, we're going to learn from it. And it allows people to come through those rough spots pretty seamlessly.
Where do you think leaders go wrong in these situations? What's the anti-playbook here?
I think the anti-playbook is they make it about themselves as opposed to making it about their teams, right? And I think that's the difference between, and I'm intentional with these words. Are you a manager or are you a leader? I've worked for managers and there's no value in that for your team. If you're not helping them, if you're not deflecting for them, if you're not managing for them to some degree upward, then you don't have a role in that. And so my focus has always been trying to be a leader. Like, how do you manage down, not manage up?
Hey, listeners, interrupting the podcast for a quick 20 seconds for a Champify plug. If you've been getting value from our content via webinars, podcasts, stuff I write on LinkedIn, I hope you understand that we think about and take pipeline generation very seriously. If you're listening to this podcast, it means you care about figuring out outbound, figuring out how to be more creative to prospect into your top accounts and win more revenue. At Champify, what we do is turn your entire company's existing relationships into new revenue. Champify's AI finds your highest converting revenue opportunities, from former customers at new companies to previously lost deals ready for a re-engagement, and turns them into a repeatable pipeline engine at scale, all within your existing workflows and low learning curve, which means high adoption. We're generating 20% of pipeline for companies like S&P Global and working with some of the largest, fastest growing B2B orgs in the world. If you're interested in what we do, we have a compelling offer for people that are listening to this podcast. We'll go through a data test, we'll go through a closed loss audit, and we'll show you the potential pipeline opportunities you have within your existing systems. Email sales@champify.io and mention this podcast, and we'll present you with a compelling offer. Enjoy the rest of the show. Yeah, the other thing I'd add that I'm curious if you agree, I just think there's like a certain flavor of leader that is almost like too hoorah, look at the bright side. And I think there's this balance of like, look, I understand where we're at. This is real. Like, I'm in the shit. I'm in the boat with you. This is what we're doing about it. But you also need to like, it's this balance of like not sugarcoating things, but also being motivational and real.
I agree. Like, I've never reacted well to the hoorah, everything's great. I don't need it. The individual, right? You're either motivated on your own and you want to have success and you know what great looks like, or you don't. And I think that's part of the job, especially in senior leadership. You probably do this in leading a company. You're finding out where to place those people with the right leaders, because you have hoorah leaders and you have really emotional leaders and you have balanced leaders and you have those profiles in your employees. And I think that's the job that we need to do as senior leaders, is to make sure they're aligned the right way.
Yeah, I think a lot more now. I'm a first time founder. I think a lot more about like energy as well. Like there's certain people that bring really good energy. It doesn't need to be in a like, hey, everything is perfect mindset, but energy is real. And I think a lot about that and where to place the right people, how to combine the right folks. So before we dig in, Scott, to like what I think is a last and really interesting segment here around the opportunity at CBTS, you mentioned and hit on talent. Like, I think, again, your background, you've just seen like a variety of stages of company. How do you think about bringing in great go-to-market talent? And I'm sure it's very dependent on, or maybe not, at the stage of company or the skill sets you need. Like any big philosophies around how you approach attracting great talent?
Yeah, it's going to come back to things we've already talked about. I've never worked in super early stage. So, the idea of you need that super high motor that's just going all the time, it's never been part of my hiring profile. I look for two things. I look for intellect and drive, as I talked about. I think, intellect is one where it will drive curiosity, and curiosity is what drives the research and the discovery and the learning that you need to do as a great seller to connect with a client. And drive is what is all about that motor. And I think drive sometimes gets confused with always on. That's not what I mean by drive. Like, you got to have a transmission, right? You need to know what gear to put it in at what time. And ultimately, yes, you look for track record of success. You look for relationships. You look for great referrals. But what I'm spending almost all my time on inside of my recruiting process is intellect and drive. And I find that those people, they will themselves to success, and you've got to figure out where their strengths and weaknesses are and support them as best as you can.
I like the two vectors there. For leaders listening that say, hey, I like that, I find that I can do a better job vetting or trying to figure out the drive part, the motivation part. How do you do that on the intellect side? It's like, it sounds great, but it's actually not so easy to test for, right? Have you found a common way you do that, or a series of questions where you can gain the confidence there?
Yeah. My favorite interview question is, at the end of almost every interview I've ever done, I say to someone, you've obviously been super successful in your career. Like, if they're interviewing with me, generally, they've had a level of success that's not up for debate. And I ask the question, which is, what's prevented you from being more successful than you've already been? And it is amazing to see all the different ways people can go in answering that question. Hopefully, I won't give away my secret sauce here. Ultimately, I'm looking for self-accountability. I'm looking for an understanding of why the decision they made or the decision they didn't make impacted success. I'm interested in the learning. I gather the learning out of that process. I figure out the changes they've made in their process, their playbook, their approach. There's a bunch of other questions I'll go through during an interview process, but that question for me has been maybe the secret sauce in my hiring practice.
I like that. Yeah, because you're right. You get this awareness and self-awareness part of it. You get the accountability part of it. And then you do get the coachability, right? Like, yes, I knew this. I wish I found it earlier. Here's what I did about it. Here's what improved, which are really the three things. I always tell a story. The first startup I worked for, you do like a mock pitch or like a challenge interview type of thing. And I did it. And the founder was like, how do you think that went? And I said, look, I could have handled this part better. Or here's something I would have done differently. He's like, great, we're doing it again right now. And I was like, huh? And really what he was trying to see is, can I take feedback? Can I learn from it? Can I act on it? And he's like, I can teach you everything about the product. I need to know that you can act on the fly from this. And I was like, that's great. So that's kind of the thing.
Right? Yeah.
100%, especially at the early stage. Like even when you're at Clari, it was relatively early. It's just, there's so much shit changing all the time, right? It's like that skill is really important. All right, let's dive into the CBTS. Like, it's an interesting space. I did a lot of homework in preparation from this. Like, how would you describe the go-to-market motion you're running there? And I'd be really interested to hear about like some of the tweaks that you have made or are making as you're still in your first year.
Yeah, and obviously we're making tweaks based on a team effort. We have an incredible sales leader in Canada, and by the time this airs, we'll have a new sales leader in the US as well. And as I talked about, we're a business that's emerged from being primarily a hardware resale business to one that services first. And so you think about the different level of skill required to go sell consultative offerings and managed services versus traditional product resale. Our motion is we're going through this process now on what does an ICP really look like? We do really well in the mid-market and enterprise space. Think of companies that are $100 million to $5 billion in revenue, regulated complex industries for us. So healthcare, financial services, manufacturing, companies that are running hybrid cloud, multi-cloud. So we have this sort of blend of skills that we're putting in place. We have a core sales team. We have a specialty team that can support them around whether it's the competencies inside the business or the service offerings that we have. And now we're starting to build a little bit more of an inside sales motion, not a BDR or an SDR motion, but more of an inside sales motion to help with our velocity, more of our velocity opportunities, because expansion is still the name of the game, right? You have 3 product portfolios. You have 3 parts of the portfolio: product resale, managed services, professional services, and finding our fair share of all 3 in our accounts is what will drive our success.
What things are you carrying forward from the UiPath and Clari experiences versus like intentionally doing different based on a kind of very different business model and pretty mature business?
I think the biggest difference is probably around when you think about driving levers and compensation models. Over time, it's been clear to me that we've over-engineered at various points what the comp plan looks like. Right back to my guiding principles concept. What are we really trying to do? And let's pick the 2 or 3 levers that are going to go do that. That's something that I think I experiment with and maybe represented the wrong opinions from time to time as we've built plans in the past. So making sure that we get to a really consistent but simple plan. Like if the sales rep can't explain the plan, then the plan fails. And I'm not sure if I reflect back on my career, I could say that I succeeded every place that way. But I think for the most part, the concepts are, the same. The core principles are the same of drive focus, make sure we have the right account patches, build the right kinds of ICP, make sure that you've identified propensity models for customers to help steer the sellers in the right place, and get as clean visibility as you can to what's in the pipeline, where we need to emphasize growth opportunity, and frankly, get to no's faster than we ever got to before. I think that's a lot of sellers have a hard time with that, but that's a recurring theme. Like, it's okay. A quick no is as good as a long yes in my mind.
Couldn't agree more. Is there any other recurring themes like that nugget that you find yourself talking about quite a bit?
Yes, it's like constant building pipeline, right? I think there's a lot of time in businesses, especially when you focus on a quarter, it's about what are we doing in this next 90 days? And just making sure that we're starting to build that muscle memory in the team as well, which is focusing on the out quarter, understanding how you build that pipeline. Even when you have short sales cycles, it's an okay thing to be balancing, your big, long deals with your short velocity-oriented transactions.
I love that. I couldn't agree more on the quick no's. I think especially more junior or less tenured reps, they like running away from that. It's like a quick no is good, right? Like find out why and move on. There's a lot of people. And the PG consistency, the common theme, I've probably done like 25 of these podcasts now. All the leaders I really respect is just like very, very, go back to your point, focus on just consistent pipe gen. Like it solves a lot of the problems. Scott, last question.
Yeah, by the way,
again,
I was going to say, by the way, the quick no means you have
time
hygiene in your
100%,
pipeline too, right? Instead of saying, I got 3X or 5X or whatever, you don't. You have 1X or 2X. Figure that out now.
Yeah.
Don't defer the problem.
100%. Last question for you, Scott. This is me. Like, I'm very interested in this. I'm most familiar with early stage companies, mostly SaaS companies. I spent a lot of my time in and around. Seeing services come back quite a bit. I think like Palantir has made this like forward deployed engineers start to be really popular, and people leaning into PS, especially these super AI native companies. Have you had to approach you talked about your 2 vectors from a talent perspective, but from a skill set and like experience, is someone selling SaaS at Clari or UiPath, which is a lot more straightforward, not easy, but a lot more straightforward than scoping out a big MSP or professional services agreement at CBTS? Do you need a different type of profile rep? Can the same person do both well?
I actually think they can. And if you look at the profile of the reps in some of the SaaS space, I mean, they've come from a services background. Like we had service source reps that were at Clari. We had folks that had come out of the big five consultancies as sellers that came to Clari to do that work. And frankly, like when you're in the middle of doing a automation deal or a revenue intelligence deal, there's a ton of scoping that goes on behind the scenes when you think about how it operates and the interdependency with Salesforce or other systems. And so again, that ability, that intellect to drive discovery and understand the desired outcomes, that person can work in SaaS, and that person can certainly work in a services business, or a services sales business, I should say.
Love it. Scott, I appreciate you making some time. I know you're running off to the airport, dropping some kids at college. Enjoy that. It's an awesome moment. I appreciate you taking some time and sharing it with the audience. Like, I think your background's really impressive, and I love the way that you're simplifying a lot of years of learning into what sound like simple but not easy concepts for people to follow. And I think you're right. It's like across the board. Like a lot of this is, whether you're selling hardware or managed services or SaaS, huge focus on PG, huge focus on quick nose, huge focus on what is the focus. I think there's like huge takeaways here for people. So I really appreciate it, Scott. Thanks for listening to Cracking Outbound. If this was helpful, let us know by messaging me, Todd Busler, on LinkedIn, and share this episode with a friend that you think will be interested. If you want more resources about building and scaling all things outbound, you can sign up for our newsletter at champify.io/blog.